Hi again, Mrs. McMahon here. If you're watching this video, which is all about evidence, it means that you are on day 1 or day 2 of writing. So definitely watch it on day 1 after you watch the previous video on writing your claim and your reasons. And I would watch this video again before you start day 2's assignment. So we're going to be talking all about evidence. The first thing I want to point out is that for this essay, you'll notice in the planner that you're supposed to have 3 pieces of evidence for each reason. And this is not something that we've ever really emphasized before. You were required to have 3 pieces of evidence for both reasons when you did the Boston Massacre letter. This time around, we're trying for 3 pieces of evidence for each reason. I know that that's a challenge, and so that's a goal. If you can only get 2 different pieces of evidence, that's fine, but you're focusing on 3. So not 3 pieces of evidence total for the essay, 3 pieces of evidence for each reason. So that's going to work out to about 9 pieces of evidence, which seems like a lot, but what you can do is pare it down when it's time to actually start writing. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to do that. And something else I want to make sure I mention is that when you're selecting the evidence, it's not 3 pieces of the same evidence. It's 3 different pieces of evidence. So for example, let's say we're writing about polar bears and we need to protect polar bears because they're losing their habitat due to climate change. And let's say you included a quote about how global warming is causing the ice caps to melt. And let's say you had a second quote about how sea levels are rising. There's really no difference between those 2 things. And so I would say that second piece of evidence isn't needed because you're covering it in the first piece. I would say find a different piece of evidence to talk about habitat loss. Maybe talk about why the habitat loss is an issue for them. They hunt on land and they need to walk around and they need to spend time on land. So then that would be your second piece of evidence. Now, I want to talk about the 2 different types of evidence you're going to be using for this particular essay. We're going to be focusing on common facts, okay? So things that most people tend to know. I gave the example of polar bears before. It's pretty much common knowledge by this point that polar bears are endangered. There's a lot of information about that out there. We hear a lot about it in the media and in the news. It's common knowledge that many species are endangered and that they're endangered because of human activity. And so that would be an example of that. Primarily, however, you're going to be focusing on expert facts. Expert facts are facts from experts. They're going to be pulled from the articles that you're reading on Newsela or any other article that you read if you're doing extra evidence. And you would introduce an expert fact with a transition like one of these. According to an article I read, evidence. In the article, you could actually name the title of the article. It says evidence. Or scientists/experts say. And this is something that's a review. This is way back when we were doing the persuasive essay back in the fall, but I thought I'd show it to you again just as a reminder. Now, we want to talk about the 2 different types of evidence that you're going to be actually including in the essay. And we talked about this before. We talked about it during the lit essay. So we want a mix of paraphrased in your own words information, and we want a mix of direct quotes written and copied directly from the source. That's where direct quotes come from. And so I'll leave it to you to decide how best to do that. I would say, if you have 3 pieces of evidence for one of your reasons, maybe have 2 direct quotes and a micro story. And then for the next one, maybe 2 micro stories and a direct quote. And then maybe for the third one, as I said before, you may have to pare down your evidence. Maybe you have 1 really long micro story that's kind of worth its weight in 2 pieces of evidence, and then 1 short direct quote after that. You can play around with it. Now, As a reminder, with direct quotes, this is something that we focused on in Lit Essay. We talked about it quite a lot. You can use parts of a quote or all of the quote. If you remember, we had a lesson on how to do that and how to use this symbol. So take a moment and try to remember what this symbol is called. It begins with an E. And if you thought of the word ellipse or ellipses, you are correct. So that's what this is, and this means that there's a piece of the quote missing, that a piece of the quote was removed. Perhaps this appeared in the beginning of the paragraph and this appeared at the end of the paragraph, and the author decided that what was happening in the middle wasn't useful and just made their quote unnecessarily long, and so they decided to remove it. And so the ellipse symbol can be used like this, where you have a little bit and then take a bit out and then you write a little bit more. Or it can be where you're taking out the beginning of the quote and then you're just using the end. Or when you're using the beginning and taking out the end. So there's a couple of different ways to do that. And again, that's a reminder. We did that during the literary essay. If you have any questions about that, just contact me privately and then I'll explain. Okay? So again, looking for a mix of these summaries, these micro stories. You take in information, common facts, expert facts, putting them in your own words, or direct quotes. Okay? Now, what I want to do next is really kind of talk about how to select the very best evidence to support your reason and your claim. And I have 3 examples here, and the claim has to do with jaguars. I chose the jaguar because I like them. They're gorgeous animals. So here is a sample claim and reason. We need to protect the jaguar because its habitat is being destroyed by humans. All right? And just make a mental note that this reason is probably one of the most common reasons why animals are endangered and probably should be one of your reasons. Okay, just hint, hint, nudge, nudge, make a mental note. So anyway, let's take a look at these 3 pieces of evidence that I lifted from the Newsy LA article about jaguars. Okay, so again, we're thinking, how can we prove that this idea of the habitat being destroyed by humans is such a problem and the reason why we need to protect the jaguar? So the first piece of evidence we have here is this. Scientists do not know the exact number of jaguars remaining in the wild. However, an estimate puts the number at 15,000. So again, here's the reason, and here's that piece of evidence. Here's the second piece of evidence. One reason for the animals' decline is deforestation. The clearing of forests has quickly destroyed the animals' original home. Jaguars are now forced to live next to farmland. They are often killed by farmers. And just as a sidebar, you'll see here this ellipse symbol because I took out a little bit of what was left of the quote. So again, here is the claim and the reason. And then here's the second quote. Here's the third quote. The jaguar is the largest living member of the cat family in North and South America. So again, here is the reason and the claim. And here's the last bit of evidence. So I'm just going to kind of scroll or zoom out a little bit here just so you can look at all 3 one more time. And I want you to ask yourself, while these 3 pieces of evidence are pulled from the article and they are expert facts and they do talk a little bit about the jaguar, which one is the very best piece of evidence for proving this idea of that their habitat is being destroyed and that's causing them to become endangered, and that's why we need to protect them. We need to protect them because we are doing things that are endangering them, and it's not their fault, and we need to protect them as a result of that. So which one of these 3, evidence A, evidence B, Evidence C. Now, hopefully you've thought about it and you've chosen this one. One reason for the animal's decline is deforestation, etc., etc., etc. This one directly discusses why their habitat is being destroyed and how their habitat is being destroyed. And it goes into a little bit more detail here about what's happening to them as a result of this. And let's talk a little bit about why these other pieces of evidence don't fit. So this one here, I could see why you might choose this one, because it's talking about how there's only 15,000 jaguars left in the wild, which if you know your endangered species stuff, you would know that that's not very high of a number. And then you might say to yourself, oh, this is good because this is talking about, this is proving that they're endangered. But if you look up here, that's not what we're trying to prove by this reason. We're talking about habitat, and this doesn't mention habitat at all. And I chose this one kind of as a curveball because it doesn't really have anything to do with habitat at all. It's just a fact about the jaguar. And so you would not necessarily use either of these pieces of information for that reason. Okay, you would only use this one, and that's a very large piece of evidence, so I might try to follow that up with perhaps a long micro story instead of trying for 3 separate pieces of evidence for that particular reason. Since this is such a long one, I might stick with this and then come up with some kind of a long micro story to go with that. Now, just because those other 2 pieces of evidence weren't useful for this reason doesn't necessarily mean that they might not be useful for another reason. So I want you to keep that in mind, that as you're gathering evidence, it's okay to move evidence around from one reason to another. And because you will be doing all of this on the Google Doc, you will find that that will be very easy. You can highlight and copy and paste and move the evidence around from one evidence box to another. And if you need any help or assistance with that, let me know and I will help you. Let's take a look at